Welcome to Minerva Meets. I'm your host, Sonal Chandler, and this is episode 28. Today, we're going to be talking about AI agents. And when I say AI agents, I mean not necessarily what they are, but more specifically about that gap between people that really want to have an agent, but then what's the path to get there. So, the reason why I wanted to bring this up today is because this is probably one of the most requested things that I get when I talk to clients. They all want to know, oh, I want an agent. I want an agent that does this or that. And then how do we get there though, right? So there is some work that I consider as a prerequisite work, if you will, to help ensure that your agent is going to be doing the right work for you. So I wanted to have an episode about this, and to help me break this topic down, I've invited Tyler Stuka, founder of SZD Labs here in Atlanta, as well as a Claude community ambassador. So, welcome to the show, Tyler. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got into the world of AI?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'll try and do the 2 minutes speed run.
Sure.
I primarily for like most of my career worked in digital transformation engineering, and so basically I worked for a company called AGCO. We manufacture industrial agricultural equipment, and for them, I would basically work with our various plants around the world to help implement technologies that drove improvements to our shop floors.
Hmm.
And so during that time period, I touched a lot of different technology, but one of my longest stints in it was we were doing more traditional AI work with actually building and developing models to try and predict when a part would arrive on the shop floor and things like that.
Hmm.
This was around 23, 24 time, and that was also kind of the Gen AI boom. And so
Right.
a lot of the focus and interest kind of shifted more to AI topics and things like that. So as I, you know, started to kind of really dive into what this technology could actually do more on the, Gen AI side, not kind of in the traditional
Right.
AI realm, I started to realize I was like, yeah, this is pretty awesome. There's a lot of opportunities that I was starting to, see for myself, and how it could be applied not just for the organization, but at the personal level as well.
Hmm.
And so, during that time period, I, was playing around with different AI tools. ChatGPT was obviously very popular.
Right.
I was, I guess, kind of a more earlier adopter of Claude. So, I've been a Claude user for close to 2 years at this point, and that was kind of like
Hmm.
before it was really popular. I basically around August of last year decided that I was going to kind of go all in on, this technology because I just really felt that it was something fundamental that I needed to do.
Hmm.
And so went full time in August of last year and have been building out my own company since then, where I work with clients primarily to implement, deploy, and really get the ROI and value out of this technology. And as I'm sure that you're well aware, there is a lot of work that goes into that. It is not as simple as just saying, "Hey, let's everyone get a Claude license and everyone starts using it."
Right.
There's all different issues with change management, with adoption, with the integration into their various systems, security, privacy, and all the things with governance as well. So,
Yeah.
it's a very exciting time. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, I met Tyler through an organization that both of us are a part of called the AI Collective,
Hmm.
and it's just really opened a lot of doors in terms of networking and meeting so many people who are coming at AI in so many different ways, and it's been really wonderful just to be part of that. So, again, really appreciate you being here. Well, let's dive into the topic here. So. AI agents, right? It's getting a lot of attention. People are saying that it can do everything for you under the sun. But, I'm really curious as clients are approaching you, what are they coming to you with? What are they saying? when it comes to agents, and then how do you respond to that? What do you tell them?
Yeah, so it really depends on like the scope and scale of what they're trying to accomplish. Like
Hmm.
a lot of times these conversations start as it's technology first. It's like, hey, we want to do stuff with agents. And so the thing that I always ask and put back on clients is like, well, what are you trying to actually do? Like
Right.
what is the value driving thing you're trying to accomplish? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What do you think this technology is going to do for you? And I frame it that way because I want people to think about it from like their own pain points first and not as
Hmm.
I need to get on the hype train and this I
Right.
have to do this, right?
Right.
And it also helps to level set the conversation because a lot of the front end work that I'm largely going to have to do is going to be, coming into an organization, understanding what their processes are, understanding, the data mapping, right?
Hmm.
Understanding, you know, who are who are the subject matter experts inside of this process that we're trying to augment or to, ultimately modify with AI in some way. And
Yeah.
that kind of preliminary sort of onboarding consulting piece is super important. I mean, that was, fundamentally where like a lot of my background at, corporate scale, like that was a
Yeah.
lot of what I did because it was this kind of critical first piece. And
Yeah.
even if whether you're a Fortune 500 or you're just a small business, right?
Hmm.
The structure and process is largely the same because you have to understand the process. You have to understand where the data systems are. You have to understand who's involved in that process and then where the technology actually maps into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of I would say like one of the biggest issues that I run into. But
Yeah,
um,
it's interesting you say that because very similarly, I find that a lot of clients, they have this FOMO, right? That if they don't get that agent today, or if they're not leveraging AI today, like they're missing out. Yeah, some of that might be true, but when you sort of peel back the onion and really ask them why they want something, what problem they're solving, all the things you mentioned, right? They sort of come back to, well, some of them are like, well, I know I have to do something. I just don't know what it is. And I think an agent's going to solve the problem. And then when you start thinking about, okay, well, let's talk about the processes. Let's talk about how things work. And you get five people in a room and each of them talks about the same process slightly differently,
yeah,
right? And that work that you're talking about is so important. And I can't tell you how many times an engagement is to build something, but what we end up doing is first the working on the process stuff, right? I call
yeah,
it process normalization and
hmm
understanding how are these use cases really tying to your business goals? What value is it bringing? And when we do that upfront work, the end result ends up becoming so much more adoptable. It's the best solution for them, but taking them through that journey, you've got to really understand how to do that, right?
yeah.
So, what does a working AI agent really do inside a business? And let's kind of talk about some examples from a small business perspective to maybe a large corporation.
Yeah, for sure. So, the way that I like to define an agent is that it is not just a workflow. It is not just a um, linear like path with a execution
Hmm.
from a user, but it is actually um, where it has some amount of bounded autonomy inside of a structure to go and complete a task given some directive. And um, like that that definition there, the bounded autonomy, I think is pretty important because it's really what structurally makes it different from something like a, you know, end-to-end automation flow, right? Because people kind of
Hmm.
conflate that. They're like, oh, I
Yeah,
have an AI, I have an agent that, reads my CRM every Monday and automatically propagates what's in the CRM into another database. That's not an agent. That's just a workflow,
right,
right?
right.
And then using this same example, right, the agent would have bounded autonomy to go and read that CRM, but make some sort of judgment call about what needs to be put where, what needs to be modified, if it even needs to be propagated at all,
Hmm.
right? So it's not just about deterministic, shifting around of information, but it's about kind of transforming and delegating
Yeah,
this kind of work to this
yeah.
entity, to the agent.
Well,
So,
it's interesting, and I want to pause there because I think what you just said is really important. I have so many conversations about automation
mhm,
and what an agent can do, right? And so I think it's important to think of automation and workflow, sorry, automation as workflow and a set of tasks being carried out automatically, if you will.
mhm,
And an agent is actually you're giving it the permission to make a judgment call on what to do next. And that's kind of how I differentiate. Do you think that that's a fair definition of if I was trying to sort of put that in my layman mind?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of confusion in the space about what it actually is, and frankly, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, like most businesses would be just as fine with simple automation
Yeah.
workflows as they would with
Yeah.
actually deploying, AI or deploying an agent to do something.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I wanted to step back a little and wanted to ask, how do you know, first of all, I will get the question out, by the way. I've got so many questions I want to ask. I can't even get one out. But what's the work that really has to happen before you start building? And we talked about understanding the workflow, understanding what, problem they're trying to solve. But is there anything else that we would have to do as a prerequisite to maybe begin looking at building an agent?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of things that go into it, but I'm going
Right.
to kind of outline some of the high level stuff.
Sure.
So it is what what is the actual scope of what this agent is tasked to do, and what systems does it have access to, and what is the outcome of what it's supposed to do, right? So just kind
Hmm.
of like setting like the high level intent of the system and what the outcome is supposed to be. Then you kind of move into more, application based, right? So it's, what systems does it touch? How much, access does it actually need, right? And then you kind of get into more of the actual technical deployment of the agents themselves, where you're talking about things like, okay, what models are we using?
Hmm.
What providers, what platforms are we using to have that oversight layer about when and how, where and how it ran? Like, how are we doing cost tracking? How are we building the evals for performance? And how are we setting permissions and governance around this so that it doesn't, um, what I call cascade chaos at the speed of light?
I love
Um,
that. Yeah.
and so there's a number of technical ways you can set up sandboxes, you can set up data pipelines to move into different environments. But you know, that's kind of I think the biggest thing I think people really should be aware of, all of the kind of performance optimization aside, is like, you're giving this entity, uh,
Hmm.
access to your systems, to your data sources, and you're saying, we want you to go and modify things, change things, make judgment calls, what, and you have to basically have a really strong mental perspective on and understand like what it has access to so that it doesn't, you know, um, do things outside of what its bounded authority is
Yeah.
directed to have.
Yeah. So it sounds like that oversight is really important.
Yeah.
Even though, there's this agent that's doing this work, it's you still need a human that's kind of overlooking and making sure that the agent itself is working correctly.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have these conversations with clients, but how do we really know when they're ready? Like what are some key things that say, okay, yeah, they're ready to take this on versus they probably need to do a little bit more work.
Yeah. And so, I would say one of the biggest prerequisites is do they have a clear value proposition in their mind about where this technology sits and what value is it to them? Um,
Hmm.
and do they have dedicated resources internally that are planning on owning it? Because it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and, you know, it's also a lot of the things with data accessibility. Um, a lot of the conversations that I get into, especially with small business owners, but I mean, this is the same thing at large corporations too, is
Yeah.
they have, you know, dispersed data systems that may or may not have, programmatic access. They may, um, you know, the process for getting data in or out of those systems is not well understood. The data itself is not clean. It is not in a place to be used for um, any sort of automation pipeline, but certainly not as part of a, kind of larger AI implementation. Um,
Hmm.
and so, those are also, I think, some of the critical things that need to be thought about. And it's also why that front end consulting stuff is so important because it
Right.
really also determines like, can we even do this thing that you think that we can do? Right.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think it's also worth noting that, um, one of the things that, and I mentally structure this in two ways because um, when I hear a lot of people talk about AI adoption or agent building in general, or just AI in general, and they go, "Yeah, our whole org it has AI. We're AI native." But what I find a lot is that organizations are conflating a couple of things, and it's not their fault. It's just like no one has really explicitly defined this, and it's a little bit different from other technology deployments where
Hmm.
the um the like structure of how of like fundamentally where and how the technology is being deployed is actually different in different departments of the company, but also um how people are actually engaging with it. So like the primary breakdown that I and the primary line that I draw
Hmm.
is AI as a tool versus AI as infrastructure as part of your
Hmm.
organization. And
Sure.
we're all very familiar with the AI as a tool. We all use ChatGPT, we all use Claude. You can use Claude Code, you can build agents in Claude Code, right, that live on your desktop that
Hmm.
you can set up connectors inside of Claude Code to interact with different things. Um, that is it, but it's fundamentally a interactive system, right?
Right.
Like you
Right. Yeah.
are the person is setting the intent. They're starting the initial prompt and they are driving that from their
Right.
computer to go and perform some task. And they have ultimate oversight over pretty much, well, they should have ultimate oversight over everything that's
Hmm.
happening in that system. AI as infrastructure is now someone still owns this, but it is agents that are deployed inside of an organization that are not deliberately used by another person. It's not a tool. It is there to, it continuously performs an action. It is running in the background, and there's usually an individual or team who has oversight over these agents and what they're doing, but they're not.
Hmm.
They're not. It's not tool usage, right? It's not someone
Right.
interacting with it directly. It's usually reactive as part of a cron job or when something is when
Triggering it
triggering
to,
it.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great distinction. And I think one um, that needs to be talked about a little bit more because there is a lot of conflation happening, right? Because we talk about automation, we talk about agents, we talk about generative AI, and everybody thinks all of it is one thing. And if when you first talk to somebody, especially as we're kind of talking to individuals as we're networking, um, you ask them like, so what does your AI adoption look like? They're like, oh, we all use it, right? But when you really start trying to peel back the onion there and really understand how they're using it, it's an interesting like fact-finding journey, I think. And then when you then try to lay the correct definitions on things, or maybe your version of what those correct definitions are, it starts becoming this. eye-opening experience, and for them and for you, right? Because you're learning about the organization. But then I think that often like what gets forgotten sometimes is that yes, you do the upfront work, you do the building, it's now live in production, but you still have to maintain this thing.
Mm,
And I don't know if that's getting a lot of love right now. I think everywhere we're talking about the upfront and the building and oh yeah, these are great, but what does it mean once you've got this agent in production doing work? What does that mean then? Like, do
yeah.
you have to maintain these? Can I just let it just do its thing, or do I have to continue updating models? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it is, yeah, there's definitely oversight and maintenance that needs to um, be built into kind of your deployment, and someone has to ultimately be responsible for that. Um,
Mhm.
for a number of reasons, I think primarily it is performance drift evals that need to be built out, and so kind of one of the sneaky problems is that like if you change something, if like the let's say you have a pipeline, for example, I'm just
Mhm.
going to make up like a use case, right? You have
Yeah.
you have a data transformation pipeline that you've built that uses AI in there in a specific model. If the pipeline expects inputs of a certain type and format, but then the front end user who's feeding information in, suddenly they start putting in a new type of information. Um, and
Mhm.
you've built your performance evals on not that information they're feeding it. Now all of a
Mhm.
sudden you've introduced this new variable into the system that could, I'm not saying that it will, but it could produce, drift in your outputs away from the performance of your desired output. And
Yeah.
you know, so those are the type of things that need to be accounted for. Luckily, there's different, governance and eval tracing and stuff like that that you can eval platforms that you can deploy for clients. But yeah, and then there's also things with cost variance,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
the big thing that I'm always harping on is that most now organizations I think are starting to really kind of get a look at what this technology actually costs to operate at scale, and they're going,
Right.
wow, it's actually not free or cheap. It's not
Right.
certainly not $20 a month like I thought it was. Um,
Right.
and you know, it depends on like where and how the agent is being used, but like text transformation is going to be like relatively cheap unless you're doing this like at massive scale. Where
Right.
we're seeing these costs skyrocket now is the agentic usage for tools and for things like software programming and things like that.
Yeah.
um and so the oversight is also about understanding not just like, oh, we spent whatever
Yeah.
$500 on AI last month. It's where and why and how that cost actually breaks down, and then how do you optimize that cost either on the input, the output, or on like the model selection. So
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree. In fact, it kind of reminds me of when things started first moving to the cloud. And trying to understand the costs of things. And, when you're like, well, I've got this Amazon S2 bucket, what am I really paying for? And then you start looking at the line items, and then you start realizing that, oh, maybe this is a little bit more than I thought it was going to be. Not exactly like for like example, but it kind of reminds me of that because I think I've poured over some of those invoices one too many times, and I think the lesson learned here is really, you know, dig deep into the costs a little to understand and to make sure you really understand what it is that you're paying for and how much those transaction costs really are
mhm,
before you start scaling this thing across the organization and then you've got a surprise cost that you weren't necessarily anticipating. So it's real. Let's just say that. Um, and I wanted to go back to something you mentioned about all this prerequisite work that has to happen. And there's that concept I said, there's this FOMO, this AI FOMO. I've got to quickly get on board. And, how do you balance I need to do this upfront work, but I also don't want to miss the train.
Yeah.
of adopting AI? What do you tell clients?
Um,
And I
yeah,
recognize that I'm putting you on the spot here with this question, so I
no, no.
apologize.
So no, it's a, like the answer is that like, people want to ride the hype train. So it's like, yeah, I'll help you facilitate that. This is the work that needs to be done. Right. And so it's not like, and it makes selling the entire work easier, right? Because it's like people want it. It's not like I have to, you know,
Right.
dangle like the cake and then it's actually a carrot or whatever. Um,
Right. Right.
um, but the I think the easiest way that I like to get into is starting with easily identifiable quick wins that I can just kind of come in and deploy easy, like for clients that I work with that don't have existing infra stacks. Like I
Yeah.
have a infrastructure stack that I can stand up very, very fast and get something running for clients basically within a week. And that makes it really easy for me to go in. If they send me like enough data beforehand, like I can basically build them a functional demo with their information. I'm like, this is how it would work. You could basically be using it tomorrow.
Mhm.
And that also makes it, the selling point pretty easy and straightforward. Um, but when I work with clients, I really try and find stuff that is like that I know is going to be a quick win to kind of showcase the
Yeah.
value, right? Like the biggest thing that I kind of run into, especially with SMBs, is they don't have like a use case, they have like a domain. They're like, yeah, we want to do marketing. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
what in marketing? We want to do sales. What in
What in
sales? It's
sales?
like it's got to be like we we want to build a workflow to help our SDRs, increase outbound by 50%. Okay, perfect. That is tangible. I can
Right.
work with that, right? But it's like they don't, so it's like I have to figure out based on what their availability looks like, what their bandwidth looks like, how many internal technical resources and like that they have that can um, help to support. I have to, understand what that process actually looks like. To your point, sitting all the people down in the room and
Hmm.
having a very clear perspective on it. Um, and from that, I can usually paint a pretty clear path about what's going to be a quick win for them. And it's usually just like, hey, I can do this thing. It's going to generate you this value for sure, but we got to do like X, Y, and Z to make sure that all the subject matter experts are consulted. We know exactly what that process looks like, and we're not missing anything critical.
Yeah, it's just, and I feel badly because all the hype that's out there is all very domain specific, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, oh, you can turn your marketing efforts into blah, 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 or you can increase your sales by blah, blah, blah if you use AI. And it really, I think, is like misleading because when
Yeah,
you walk into an organization and when you start really asking the questions, the why, the what, the why, the what, and you really kind of drill down into it, they don't have a specific use case. And I'm not saying everyone's like that, but you then have to start helping them come up with use cases, right? And that's
yeah.
completely different than building, right? We're now still in the prereq work. Um, well, let's talk a little bit about, and you've kind of already told us some things about, what could go wrong, right? But let's kind of really dig into when things can go sideways. What are, what are some things that we should be paying attention to? You talked about drift and things like that, but is there anything else that as if I'm implementing this, that I need to really make sure I'm looking out for some risks and things like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say talking more kind of, well, there there's a number of risks and it really depends on like where the technology is integrated into the company. But like I
Hmm.
would say the two things that come to my mind first are um in the AI as a tool realm, um, unverified interpretations and outputs based on data sources that are either inaccessible or the model can't verify. So like it's like what I mean by that is like if you are using any any model, Claude, GPT,
Hmm.
or whatever, to um, help you to arrive to a decision in your work where its intent and judgment is part of the output, one of the things that people don't think about is like actually being able to backtrace how the model got to that conclusion and what
Yeah.
inputs it actually used to get there. Um, if you are just using like the chat function, it's like I get into this conversation all the time, and I have a pretty good example actually from the governance panel. So
Okay. Yeah.
I had this conversation with someone else, and I forget who said it in the crowd, but they were like, I asked, whatever Claude, my Myers-Briggs
Oh,
type,
yes.
and it was like spot on. And I was like, but can you go back and like, yes, it'll probably tell you something that sounds like you, but can you tell it to go back and backtrace every single data point that it used to arrive to that conclusion? And if it can't do it, would you trust the output? Um,
Right.
and that is, I think, one of the biggest gaps right now in organizational deployment is like we put so much stock in the interpretive ability of this technology without really
Yeah.
thinking about what it actually used to come to that conclusion in the first place. And so
Hmm.
that is one of the primary risks, and that is across industry. And I was having another conversation with some folks in the scientific research
Hmm.
realm, and that was one of the things that came up. Is they're like, yeah, we're using Claude to like do scientific research, but it's like, how do we know what it used to come to that conclusion? And it's like, it's like, but that's
Yeah.
like that's like critical. Like you can't like publish
Yeah.
a paper and you're like, yeah, Claude said that we can
Right.
cure cancer, and it's like, well, how? It's like, I don't know. It's
Right.
like you can't do that, right?
Yeah. It's like that
And then
attorney that used those specific legal cases to fight a case, and he was citing these cases, and it ended up that they were all made up,
yeah,
but he didn't question it, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of a similar example there.
yeah. And then the other side of it, more on the agentic side, is um, with no verifiability, with no integral kind of like function for
Hmm.
actually gatekeeping when, where, and how an agent can modify a system or produce records or write something. It is very easy, especially if they have access to multiple systems at the same time that can,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
cascade chaos, as I call it. I had an example. This was my personal system, not a client deployment, where an agent went and um, as part of a research like web scrape, it went and pulled uh, some information about a person, and what it read was a post that this individual had went to the Microsoft headquarters, like from their LinkedIn profile. What came back, what the model actually inferred was that they were starting a job at Microsoft, which was
Oh,
not true.
wow.
They did
Yeah.
not work at Microsoft. They had visited the headquarters as part of something. Um, in the background, as part of this research, it took that falsified record and propagated it to three separate systems of record, wrote dependent docs based on it, and then um, stored that like specific fact in a kind of mechanism for long-term storage.
Yeah.
Um, and the only reason that I caught it was because it came back again as part of a different chat where it said, "Oh, this person works at Microsoft." I'm like, "That's literally not true." And I was like, "Go back and like look at where this was." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm so sorry. I put this in three separate systems of record." And that is not the model's fault. That is my
Right.
fault because it is
Right.
my duty. It is my I own that system, and it was a poor architectural decision for how I built my own system. And so
Yeah.
since then, I've gone back and looked at how um, rebuilt the mechanism for how and when it is allowed to cascade information like that. So, but this is, without the proper architectural decisions, without the proper knowledge of how this technology actually works,
Hmm.
it's very easy for stuff like that to happen.
Yeah.
Regardless of which model like you're using. Like the model in question was Opus 4.8. It's okay. It's like the best model, right? Like,
Right. Right.
you know, so um so this is also another thing that I really think is critical for people to understand is like when you're developing and designing these solutions is like you really need someone with technical understanding of how this stuff actually works because
Yeah.
um, there is a level of technical depth to it that if you if you bypass that, that's where a lot of the gotchas end up being. So
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you so much for sharing those use cases too, because I think that it's easy to just sort of talk about some of the risks, but when you actually are putting it to real things that are happening, it resonates, right? Like I can relate to that. You've got a lived experience that you're sharing, and it's real. This stuff is actually happening out there. Um, so when it comes to risk, as you know, governance is close to my heart. And I kind of feel like with governance, we're in this point of the AI journey where we're trying to sort of fit governance, AI governance into a traditional governance bucket, and it may not necessarily all fit nicely like that. But real quick, what is your opinion on security and governance when it comes to AI?
yeah, so it's I guess kind of two separate things that are like so when I the governance I- both sides are very important, but they kind of elicit different lines of thinking about, what is a security risk and when and where do you need governance because, you need the governance that also enables proper security. But, from the governance side, right? Like um, there is, I think, a number of things that people are from like my conversations when they talk about
Mhm.
governance, it seems to be that like people all kind of wrap it into like one thing, but it's like
Yeah.
it's not, it's multi-layered across the organization, when, where, and how it is who owns it is largely dependent on
Yeah.
what the organization is, how large it is, right? But when I think about governance specifically for AI applications, I think a lot of it about I think a lot about it kind of in three buckets. And there's probably more buckets, but this is just like
Sure. Yeah,
my
yeah.
current like working mental model of it is like you
Yeah.
have governance at kind of the organizational level where it's like
Mhm.
people people get together in a boardroom or in a meeting room or whatever, and they decide, okay, this is where the technology lives. This is how we're deploying it. This is how we're having oversight. This is who
Mhm.
owns it. Like all these kind of like organizational and personnel decisions around it.
Right.
Then at the next level, you have the actual governance of like the actual systems themselves, which is in my mind, again, this is more um, application layer. So it is having actually the observability of where these systems are, when they ran, what they actually
Mhm.
touched, and having you know um, oversight directly into what's running. And for most organizations, if they're doing governance, it stops at that first level because they've decided, okay,
Yes.
yeah, we have oversight, but they haven't actually put in place the appropriate layers to actually know when, where, and how this technology is running. And then at the deepest level, and this is the level that really does not exist truly yet, except at like maybe the most sophisticated deployments, governance is integral to the system design itself, meaning that like the how the models run and the infrastructure that supports and wraps around them is a governance layer. It is built into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I just had this conversation with somebody who is working with an organization who's in the process of adopting AI, and he keeps bringing that piece up. And it's not necessarily getting the love that it needs. It's sort of more, let's kind of look at it from an organization perspective. And they're getting there. They're not saying no, but I completely agree with you. It doesn't exist. It's not something that's popular, right? And because it's hard. I think it's
Yeah.
hard to think through all the different variations or layers or levels of governance that's necessary there. Is just what I'm seeing out there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard because one, it's hard to conceptualize.
Yeah.
And two, it's also hard to sell it. It's like, why do I need this? Well, if you go
Yeah.
back to my previous example where the model wrote those false records, that's the system that would have stopped that from happening. in the first place.
Yes,
That was the
exactly.
failure point, right? Like
Yeah.
my two layers of governance, which was me, because it's my system,
Right.
and then my oversight layer had no authority or directive to be able to stop that action from taking place.
Yeah.
The only way that that action gets stopped is at the infrastructure level for that the models actually run on.
Yeah.
And so it's a critical piece that most organizations, with the exception of like, I don't know, maybe like whatever Microsoft or whatever,
Right.
big tech companies are thinking about. But
Yeah.
it's deeply needed.
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. All right. Well, we're almost at the end here, and so a couple of last questions. For someone who's listening and, they feel like, oh my gosh, I'm still overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. What's a realistic first step that they can take?
Yeah. So for an organization or for like an individual?
How about both?
Okay. Um, to adopting it, to
Okay, yeah. Let
yeah,
me kind of
let's
give you some context, right? So maybe let's forget the individual and let's just think about a small business.
okay.
And they're basically, wanting to move into leveraging agentic AI. And they're listening to us today and they're saying, well, this was all really great information, but I still don't know what I need to do.
Yeah.
So where should they start?
Yeah. So for so actually in a lot of my work and with clients now, even those that are non-technical that would be scared of a command line that have never written software in
Right.
their entire life, I would say, you know, getting into Claude Code or Codex or another agentic type of harness that you can use and control and kind of play around with is really important for understanding kind of how this technology works and um you know a lot of the scariness of kind of working at it because it's like, oh, it's in the command line and it's running bash commands and I don't know what that is
Mm.
you can interact directly with the model and ask it questions about what it's doing. Like you can set the permissions, you can put it into a sandbox, you can do all this stuff so that you don't have this massive blast radius and you can play around and kind of learn it. And honestly, that's what I like. I am actually moving in the direction of like providing tools, systems, education to even
Yeah.
non-technical clients so that they are empowered to use and kind of build with the technology themselves because
Yeah.
um, I think that's one where a lot of the value lies is kind of giving them that putting the power back in the hands of individual people, but it's also just what I'm seeing in general. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, I talk to so many people now who are like, yeah, I'm a domain expert of, have never programmed anything in my entire life and I use Claude Code to build this app or build this thing
Yeah.
for my business that has tangible value, that drives value for me and my customers and my business. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's perfect. People, but like that's not going away, right? Like people are gonna it's gonna keep going that way and people are gonna keep, moving into it. So it's like I would just encourage everyone to, if you're curious, right, download Claude Code,
Yeah.
and get your hands a little dirty. It's the best and only way because
Yeah.
it's so variable in different people's approaches to it and things like that. So,
Yeah, I call AI sort of like the great equalizer, right? It's allowed those of us who aren't, complete techies to become somewhat technical,
mhm.
and it's allowed the small businesses to compete with some of the larger ones, right? There's just so much that AI has allowed us to do. And I always encourage my clients to, just subscribe to one newsletter. There's a million out there, but just be consistent with reading one of them. Don't be shy, right? Like you said, just dive in and start playing around. And, there's a lot of workshops, AI fundamentals workshops that help you kind of get up to speed. I offer one of them. So, just come on in and the one thing I have found is on the outside, AI becomes, it seems very intimidating. But when you actually get into the crowd and you start talking to the different people, everybody is so helpful and so willing to want to teach and show and learn and like kind of, raising everybody together. So that's one thing I will say that I have found in all of these AI communities is everybody's just so excited to bring everybody else along with them. So,
Hmm.
um, well, one last question before we wrap up here. And if there's one thing that you want our listeners to walk away with when it comes to agentic AI, whether it's a mindset shift, you think, or even just a tip, what is it that you want our listeners to know about it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that there's there's absolutely value in it for you, regardless of who you are. And one of the best ways that I've seen people kind of have the light bulb switch, the light bulb go on in their head is like when they see something um, that is built that resonates with them, that they go, oh yeah, like that would be of value to me. Like now I see how this
Yeah,
stuff works, right? And so, um, I would just encourage you to spend some time, like if you can go to a workshop where they're live demoing stuff, if you can, even watch like videos on YouTube, or I mean, you can call, someone directly that, can help you kind of get started. But yeah, like really seeing it, and like working is, I think the best way. And that's what I've seen through all the Claude, um, community events that we ran, like the last one down at GSU, like we had, 250 students come out and they
yeah,
all got into Claude Code in the command line and they built real products, shipped them to for sale. And I mean, that was, people left with something tangible, right? And
right.
so anything like that, I think has awesome value for getting people to kind of see the value of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour or the last hour with me. I really appreciate it. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you, whether it's on LinkedIn, if you have a website, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, absolutely. Most of my socials are Tyler Stuka. My website, szdlabs, .io, if you are interested in any of my services or if you want to get upskilled in AI as well. So,
Yeah. And just so everybody knows, it's SZTUKA. I don't,
yes.
because the Z is silent, so I want to make sure they can find you. And I always like to remind people that if you'd like to get in touch with Minerva Consulting, you can email us at let's talk at minervaconsultinginc.com. You can also go to our online home at minervaconsultinginc.com. And finally, I always want my listeners to take three next steps. One, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Leave a rating and please add a comment. I love reading them. So please leave a comment. Tyler, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show at some point and we can really dive into all the cloud work you've been doing. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.